I remember the way the sea air always found its way into our house, no matter how tightly we shut the windows. Even now, years later, I can close my eyes and smell the salt, the faint tang of seaweed, the promise of rain. Our house sat on a gentle rise above St. Valerianco, its stone walls battered by decades of wind, its garden wild and fragrant with lavender and rosemary. My parents bought it after the war, when hope was something you could hold in your hands, and I inherited it when they were gone. It was never just a house. It was the heart of our family, the keeper of our secrets. I never married. I suppose I was too busy taking care of everyone else. My younger sister, Isabel, was always the wild one, beautiful, impulsive, restless. She left for Paris at 18, chasing dreams and men, and left me behind to care for our aging parents. I didn't mind, not really. I loved them, and I loved this house. I thought that was enough. I can still see my mother in the kitchen, her hands dusted with flour, humming old chansons as she kneaded dough. My father, tall and stoic, would come in from the garden with dirt under his nails and a rare, gentle smile. We weren't perfect, but there was a kind of quiet contentment in those years, a sense of belonging I clung to even as the world changed around us then. One rainy night when I was 32, Isabel showed up on my doorstep, soaked to the bone, clutching a baby in her arms. I remember the sound of the doorbell echoing through the house, the way my heart leaped in my chest. I hadn't seen her in nearly 3 years. When I opened the door, she looked like a ghost, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes wild with fear. "Her name is Juliet," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't do this, Claire. Please, take her." I took Juliet in without a second thought. She was only 6 months old, with a shock of dark hair and eyes as blue as the sea. Isabel stayed for a few weeks, drifting through the house like a shadow, barely speaking. She would disappear for hours, returning with the smell of cigarettes and cheap perfume clinging to her clothes. One morning, I found a note on the kitchen table, written in her looping, careless script. "I'm sorry, I can't stay. Take care of her. Love, Isabel." She was gone before I woke up. I never saw her again. I raised Juliet as my own, pouring all the love I had into her. The early years were hard, money was tight, and I had to juggle my job as a school secretary with the demands of a baby who cried for her mother in the night. But there was joy, too. I remember the way Juliet would giggle when I spun her around the kitchen, her tiny hands clutching at my dress. I remember the smell of her hair after a bath, the weight of her sleeping body in my arms. Saint-Valerie-N-Caux is the kind of place where everyone knows your name, where gossip travels faster than the tide. The town square is lined with old stone buildings, their shutters painted in faded blues and greens. There's a bakery that smells of fresh bread every morning, a tiny cafe where the fishermen gather to drink coffee and argue about the weather, and a church whose bells ring out over the rooftops every Sunday. I've lived here my whole life, and sometimes it feels like the town itself is a living thing, watching and remembering. People would stop me in the street to ask about Juliet, to offer advice or sympathy. Some were kind, others less so. "It's good of you, Claire," Madame Lefebvre would say, her voice heavy with meaning, "taking in your sister's child. Not everyone would do that." I would smile and nod, swallowing the hurt. I knew what they were thinking, that Isabel was a lost cause, that I was the responsible one, the one who stayed behind. But I didn't care what they thought. Juliet was mine, in every way that mattered. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. Juliet grew up in the house by the sea, running barefoot through the garden, her laughter echoing off the stone walls. She was bright and curious, always asking questions, always wanting more. She would follow me into the garden, her chubby fingers digging in the dirt, her face smeared with mud and sunshine. "Why do the snails hide under the leaves, Auntie?" she'd ask, her voice full of wonder. "To stay cool and safe," I'd reply, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Just like us, she was a good child, kind, thoughtful, and fiercely intelligent. I did my best to give her everything: a good education, piano lessons, trips to the beach. I worked long hours at the school, pinching pennies to make ends meet, but I never let her see how hard it was. I wanted her to feel safe, to know that she was loved. Sometimes, late at night, I would stand at the window and watch the lights of the fishing boats bobbing in the harbor. I would think of my parents, of Isabel, of all the people I had loved and lost. I would wonder if I had made the right choices, if I had given too much of myself away. But then Juliet would come padding down the hall in her pajamas, her hair a wild halo around her face, and climb into my lap. "Tell me a story, Auntie," she'd whisper, and I would tell her about the sea, about the women in our family, about the strength it takes to stay when everyone else leaves. I didn't know then how much those stories would matter. I didn't know how much I would need them myself. The years after Isabel left were a blur of small routines and quiet determination. I learned to do everything with one hand while holding Juliet in the other, stirring soup, folding laundry, even writing out lesson plans for the school. She was a fussy baby at first, always searching for something she couldn't name, but when she smiled, it was like the sun coming out after a long storm. I would hold her close and whisper, "You're safe, my darling. I'm here. I'll always be here." St. Valerenco is a place that remembers. The neighbors watched me with a mix of pity and admiration, their voices soft when they spoke of Isabel's disappearance. Some days, I felt like a character in a story everyone else was telling, but I kept my head high. I wanted Juliet to grow up proud, not ashamed of the circumstances that brought her to me. She grew quickly, her first steps taken on the cool tiles of our kitchen, her first words echoing in the garden as she chased after butterflies. I taught her to read before she started school, and she devoured every book I brought home from the library. She was curious about everything: why the sea changed color, why the church bells rang at noon, why her mother never wrote. I tried to answer her questions honestly, but some answers were too heavy for a child. "Your mother loved you very much," I would say, brushing her hair at night. "She just had to go away." Sometimes, I caught her looking out the window at the road that led out of town, her small face thoughtful and sad. I wondered if she felt the same ache of abandonment that I did, if she would ever forgive Isabel for leaving. Money was always tight. My job at the school paid just enough to keep us fed and the house warm, but there were months when I had to choose between a new pair of shoes for Juliet and a visit to the doctor for myself. I never let her see me worry. I wanted her to feel safe, to believe that the world was a kind place. There were moments of joy too. On Sundays, we would walk down to the harbor and buy fresh fish from the boats, our baskets heavy with mussels and shrimp. We'd sit on the seawall, our feet dangling over the edge, and watch the tide come in. Juliet would ask endless questions about the fishermen, the boats, the far-off places they visited. I could see the hunger for adventure in her eyes, the same restlessness that had driven Isabel away. Sometimes, in the evenings, I would invite Luc Fournier for dinner. He was a widower by then, his children grown and scattered across France. He had a gentle way about him, a quiet humor that made Juliet giggle and put me at ease. He would bring a bottle of wine or a loaf of bread, and we would sit in the kitchen, long after Juliet had gone to bed, talking about everything and nothing. There was a comfort in his presence, a sense that I wasn't as alone as I sometimes felt. One night, after Luc had left and the house was quiet, Juliet crept into the kitchen, her eyes wide and serious. "Do you like Monsieur Fournier Antique?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, surprised by the question. "He's a good friend, darling. Why do you ask?" She shrugged, twisting a strand of hair around her finger. "He makes you laugh. I like it when you laugh." I pulled her into my lap, holding her close. "I like it too," I admitted. "It's nice to have someone to talk to." She nodded, her head resting on my shoulder. "I think he likes you." I laughed, feeling a blush rise to my cheeks. "Maybe he does. But I have everything I need right here." She smiled, content, and I felt a wave of gratitude for the small, perfect moment. As Juliet grew older, the differences between us became more pronounced. She was ambitious, restless, hungry for the world beyond our little town. She devoured books, learned English and Spanish at school, and dreamed of traveling to far-off places. I tried to support her, but I could feel her slipping away, bit by bit. When she was 16, she started spending more time with friends from Rouen, taking the train into the city on weekends. She came home late, her eyes shining with excitement, her head full of stories about art galleries and concerts and boys with motorcycles. I worried, of course. I tried to set boundaries, to keep her safe, but she pushed back, testing the limits of my patience and love. "You don't understand, Auntie," she'd say, her voice sharp with frustration. "I don't want to spend my whole life in this town. I want more." I wanted to tell her that I understood better than she thought, that I, too, had once dreamed of escape, of adventure. But life had other plans for me. I stayed because someone had to, because love sometimes means sacrifice, but I kept those thoughts to myself. Instead, I watched her go, my heart aching with pride and fear. Luke noticed the change in me. One evening, as we sat in the garden, he poured me a glass of wine and said, "You're allowed to worry, Claire, but you're also allowed to let her go. She's strong. You made her that way." I looked at him, the lines of his face softened by the fading light. "I just want her to be happy." He smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "She will be, and so will you, if you let yourself." His touch lingered, warm and reassuring. For a moment, I let myself imagine a different life, a life where I wasn't always the caretaker, where I could be loved for myself. But the moment passed, and I pulled my hand away, embarrassed by my own longing. Juliet left for university. In Rouen, the following autumn, the house felt emptier than ever. I kept her room just as she left it, the walls covered in posters and photographs, her childhood toys lined up on the shelves. I would sit on her bed sometimes, breathing in the faint scent of her perfume, listening to the silence. She called, less and less as the months went by, her visits growing shorter and more strained. She had a new life now, a boyfriend, a job, friends who didn't know or care about our little town. I tried not to take it personally. I told myself she was just busy, that she'd come back to me when she was ready. But the truth was, I was alone. I filled my days with work, with gardening, with small acts of care for the house and the memories it held. I joined a book club, started volunteering at the church, tried to build a life for myself outside of being Juliet's aunt, but nothing filled the emptiness. Sometimes, late at night, I would stand at the window and watch the lights of the fishing boats bobbing in the harbor. I would think of my parents, of Isabel, of all the people I had loved and lost. I would wonder if I had made the right choices, if I had given too much of myself away. But then Juliet would call, her voice bright and hurried, and for a moment, the ache would ease. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. I didn't know then how much everything was about to change. I didn't know how quickly the life I'd built could be swept away. But I would learn. Oh, I would learn. The house felt different after Juliet left for university. It was as if the walls themselves had exhaled, settling into a silence I hadn't known since before she was born. I tried to keep busy. There was always something to do in an old house like ours. The garden needed weeding, the shutters needed painting, and the attic, with its boxes of old letters and forgotten clothes, always seemed to be calling for attention. But no matter how much I did, the emptiness lingered. I would walk through the rooms in the evening, turning off lights, checking locks, listening to the creak of the floorboards. Sometimes I'd pause in the doorway of Juliet's room, just to look at the way the late sun slanted across her bed, the posters on the wall curling at the edges. I left everything as she'd left it, as if she might walk back in at any moment, toss her bag on the floor, and ask what was for dinner. She called less and less as the months went by. At first, she'd phone every Sunday, her voice bright and full of stories about her classes, her new friends, the city. I'd listen, asking questions, trying to keep up with the names and places that were becoming her world. But gradually, the calls became shorter, more hurried. Sometimes she'd forget, and I'd spend the evening staring at the phone, telling myself she was just busy. When she did come home, it was never for long. She'd arrive with a suitcase and a new haircut, her eyes shining with excitement, her head full of plans. She'd hug me, let me fuss over her for a day or two, and then she'd be off, again meeting friends, visiting her boyfriend, always in a rush to get back to the city. I tried not to let it hurt, but it did. I missed the little girl who used to curl up in my lap, who wanted nothing more than to be close to me. One weekend, she brought her boyfriend, Antoine, to visit. He was polite, handsome in a way that seemed almost too perfect, and clearly uncomfortable in our small town. He spent most of the time on his phone, checking messages, glancing at his watch. Juliet seemed different around him, more guarded, less open. I tried to make conversation, to welcome him, but the visit felt strained, as if we were all pretending to be people we weren't. After they left, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea, staring at the empty chairs. I wondered if this was what it meant to let go, to watch your child build a life that no longer included you. I told myself it was natural, that every parent went through it, but the ache in my chest didn't care about logic. Luke noticed the change in me. He would stop by in the evenings, bringing a loaf of bread or a bottle of wine, and we'd sit in the garden, watching the sun set over the sea. He never pushed, never asked questions I didn't want to answer. Sometimes we'd talk about the past, our childhoods, the people we'd lost, the dreams we'd let go. Other times, we'd sit in comfortable silence, listening to the wind in the trees. One evening, as we watched the sky turn pink and gold, Luke reached over and took my hand. His touch was warm, steady. "You're allowed to miss her, Claire," he said softly. "But you're also allowed to live your own life." I looked at him, surprised by the tenderness in his voice. "I don't know how," I admitted. "I've spent so long taking care of everyone else. I don't know who I am without her." He smiled, squeezing my hand. "You're still you, and you're not alone." His words stayed with me long after he left. That night, I lay in bed, listening to the distant sound of the waves, and wondered what it would be like to let someone in again, to be loved, not just needed. The seasons changed, and with them, the rhythm of my days. I joined a book club at the library, started volunteering at the church, tried to fill the hours with something other than longing. I made new friends, women my age who understood what it meant to watch your children grow up in a way. We'd meet for coffee, share stories, laugh about the things we couldn't change. But there were still nights when the loneliness crept in, sharp and sudden. I'd find myself standing at the window, watching the lights of the fishing boats bobbing in the harbor, and wonder if I'd made the right choices, if I'd given too much of myself away. It was during one of those nights that I first noticed the cough. It started as a tickle in my throat, nothing more. I ignored it, telling myself it was just the change in weather, the dampness of the old house. But it didn't go away. It grew worse, until I was waking up in the night, gasping for breath, my chest tight and aching. I put off going to the doctor for as long as I could. There was always something more important work. The garden, a letter from Juliet to answer. But eventually, I couldn't ignore it any longer. The doctor listened to my chest, sent me 4 tests, and then sat me down in his office, his face grave. "It's cancer, Claire," he said gently. "We caught it early, but you'll need surgery, and after that, treatment." I sat there, numb, the words echoing in my head. Cancer, surgery, treatment. I thought of my parents, of Isabel, of all the people I'd cared for. I'd always been the strong one, the caretaker. I didn't know how to be the one who needed help. I called Juliet that night, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice bright and distracted. "Auntie, I was just about to call you. Antoine and I are going to a concert tonight." I cut her off, my voice trembling. "Juliet, I need you to come home. I'm sick. The doctor says I need surgery." There was a long pause, and then her voice, small and scared. "I'll come, Auntie, I promise." She arrived the next day, her face pale and drawn. She hugged me tightly, her arms trembling. For a while, it felt like old times. She cooked for me, drove me to appointments, sat with me during long, sleepless nights. But she was distracted, always on her phone, talking about work and her life. In Paris, she stayed for a week, then left again, promising to visit soon. I tried not to take it personally. I told myself she was just overwhelmed, but the truth was, I was alone. The house felt emptier than ever. I spent my days shuffling from room to room, dusting old photographs, watering the plants, trying to keep the memories at bay. Sometimes, I'd find myself standing in the attic staring at the old trunks my parents left behind. I never opened them. Some things, I thought, were better left undisturbed. One afternoon, as I was sorting through papers in the kitchen, I found a letter tucked inside an old cookbook. The handwriting was unmistakable, my mother's, looping and elegant. "For Claire, when she is ready." My heart pounded as I unfolded the letter. It was dated June 1972, the summer Isabel was born. "My dearest Claire, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you are the keeper of our family's secrets. There are things you do not know, things I could never say aloud. I hope you will forgive me. Love is complicated, and sometimes we make choices we cannot undo. Take care of your sister. She will need you more than you know." I read the letter over and over, searching for meaning in the spaces between the words. What secrets? What choices? I thought of Isabel, of her wildness, her sadness, the way she always seemed to be running from something. I wondered if I would ever know the truth. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to my stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. I didn't know then how much everything was about to change. I didn't know how quickly the life I'd built could be swept away, but I would learn. Oh, I would learn. The days before the surgery passed in a haze of appointments, paperwork, and sleepless nights. I tried to keep busy, making lists of things to do, things to pack, things to remember. I wrote out instructions for the garden, for the bills, for the cat that sometimes wandered into our yard and made itself at home. I tried to pretend that everything was normal, that I was just going away for a few days and would be back before anyone noticed I was gone. Juliet called every evening, her voice bright and hurried. Don't worry, Auntie. I'll take care of everything. Just focus on getting better. She promised to be there when I woke up, to bring me flowers and magazines, to make sure the doctors did everything right. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. The night before the surgery, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the wind rattling the shutters, the distant sound of the sea. I thought about my mother's letter, about the secrets she'd hinted at but never explained. I wondered if I would ever have the chance to ask the questions that haunted me. I wondered if Juliet would ever understand how much I loved her, how much I had given up for her. At dawn, I packed a small bag and waited for the taxi. The hospital in Dieppe was an hour away, a gray building perched on a hill above the town. The drive passed in silence, the fields and villages blurring past the window. I tried to memorize every detail, afraid that I might never see them again. The hospital was cold and bright, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and something sweeter, flowers maybe, or the memory of home. The nurses were kind, their voices gentle as they checked my name, my date of birth, my allergies. I changed into a thin gown, folded my clothes into a neat pile, and tried not to think about what was coming. Juliet arrived just before they wheeled me into surgery. She looked tired, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. She squeezed my hand, her grip tight and desperate. I'll be here when you wake up, she whispered. I promise. I tried to smile, to reassure her, but my throat was too tight. I wanted to tell her everything, to apologize for the times I'd been too strict, to thank her for the laughter and the love, to beg her not to leave me, but there wasn't time. The nurse touched my shoulder, and then I was moving. The ceiling lights sliding past in a blur. The last thing I remember before the anesthesia took me was Juliet's face, pale and frightened, fading into the distance. When I woke up, everything hurt. My chest ached, my throat was raw, and my mind was thick with confusion. The room was quiet, the only sound, the steady beep of the heart monitor. I reached for my phone, desperate for a familiar voice, a sign that I was still myself. There was a message from Juliet. Auntie, I'm so sorry. I had to make a decision. The house is sold. I'll explain everything when you're better. Please don't be angry. I love you. I stared at the screen, my mind refusing to process the words. Sold. Our house. The house my parents built. The house I raised her in. The only home I'd ever known. I called her, my hands shaking, but she didn't answer. I called again and again, leaving desperate voicemails. Finally, she sent a text. It was the only way. Auntie, you need the money for treatment. I did it for you. I felt something inside me break. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the pain in my chest sharper than anything the doctors could have done. I tried to tell myself it was a mistake, that I'd misunderstood. Maybe she meant something else. Maybe she was just overwhelmed, like I was. But deep down, I knew. I could feel the truth settling in my bones, heavy and cold. A nurse came in to check my vitals, her face kind but distracted. She asked if I wanted anything: water, painkillers, a warm blanket. I shook my head, unable to find my voice. What I wanted, no one could give me. I wanted my home. I wanted my life back. I must have drifted in and out of sleep, because the next thing I remember is the sound of my phone buzzing on the tray beside my bed. Another message from Juliet. Auntie, please. I know you're angry. I'll come tomorrow. We'll talk. I promise. I stared at the words, my hands trembling. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, to scream, to demand answers, but all I could do was lie there, numb and exhausted. The hospital room felt like a prison. From my window, I could see the rooftops of the old city, the spire of the church, the endless gray sea beyond. The room was small but clean, with a single bed, a battered armchair, and a vase of wilting flowers on the windowsill. The air smelled of disinfectant and something sweeter, maybe the flowers, maybe the memory of home. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past few months, the diagnosis, the fear, Juliet's promise to take care of me, the way she'd held my hand before the surgery, her eyes shining with tears. Had it all been a lie? Had she been planning this from the start? Or was she just desperate, like me? Thought of the house, the creak of the stairs, the warmth of the kitchen, the garden wild with lavender. I thought of my parents, of Isabel, of all the years I'd spent trying to hold our family together, and now, with a single decision, it was all gone. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the sky lighten through the window, the world outside moving on, as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. The morning after the surgery, I watched the world outside my hospital window come alive. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, the kind that always made me think of childhood and beginnings. But I felt none of that hope. I felt only the ache in my chest and the emptiness where my home used to be. Juliet arrived just after breakfast, her face drawn and pale, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look younger, almost like the girl I'd raised. She carried a bag of fresh clothes for me, and a bouquet of wildflowers, lavender daisies, a sprig of rosemary from our old garden. I wanted to be angry, to shout, to demand answers, but when I saw her standing there, so small and uncertain, all I could do was look away. She sat in the chair by my bed, her hands twisting in her lap. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick, heavy with everything we'd left unsaid. "I'm sorry, Auntie," she whispered at last, her voice barely more than a breath. "I didn't know what else to do. The bills were piling up, and you needed care. I found a buyer, he paid cash. It's done." Her words hung in the air, sharp and final. I stared at her, searching her face for the little girl who used to curl up in my lap, the child who would beg for one more story before bed. She was gone. "You had no right," I said, my voice trembling. "That house was all I had. It was your mother's, your grandmother's, it was ours." She looked away, her jaw clenched. "You don't understand. I did it for you. For us. For us," I repeated, my anger rising. "You sold our home, Juliet. The only place I've ever belonged. How could you?" She wiped her eyes, her hands shaking. "I was scared, Auntie. I thought if I could just fix things, maybe you'd get better. Maybe we could start over." I wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her see what she'd done, but I was too tired, too broken. I turned my face to the window, watching the clouds drift by, and let the silence settle between us. The next day, the doctors discharged me. Juliet drove me back to town in her small, battered car. We didn't speak. I watched the fields roll by, the familiar landmarks of my life, an old stone bridge, a row of poplars, the distant glint of the sea. Each one felt like a goodbye. When we reached the apartment she'd rented, I hesitated on the threshold. It was clean and bright, with white walls and a view of the square, but it wasn't home. My things were packed in boxes, my memories reduced to cardboard and tape. I stood in the middle of the living room, lost. Juliet tried to make things easier. She cooked for me, brought me tea, fussed over my medication. She was gentle, almost childlike in her attempts to make things right, but I could feel the distance between USA Guelph neither of us knew how to cross. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me, her eyes full of worry and regret, and I'd have to look away. One afternoon, as the rain tapped softly against the window, I sat at the little kitchen table, staring at a chipped mug of coffee. The world outside was gray and blurred, the square below empty except for a few bundled-up shoppers hurrying home. I heard the door open and close, footsteps on the stairs, and then Juliet's voice, soft and uncertain. "Auntie, there's someone here to see you." I looked up, surprised. I wasn't expecting anyone. Before I could answer, a familiar figure stepped into the kitchen, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Look," he smiled, a little uncertain, and for a moment, I felt the years fall away. "Hello, Claire," he said, his voice warm and steady. "I hope I'm not intruding." He set the flowers on the table, his hands rough and careful. "Juliet called me. She said you might need a friend." I glanced at Juliet, who stood in the doorway, her face uncertain. I realized then how much she wanted to help, how lost she must feel. I managed a small smile. "Thank you, Luke. It's good to see you." He sat down across from me, his eyes kind. "I heard about the house. I'm so sorry, Claire. I know what it meant to you. I nodded, unable to speak. The grief was still too raw, too close to the surface. Luke reached across the table, his hand covering mine. His touch was warm, grounding. If you ever want to talk, or just get out of here for a while, I'm around. I'm not going anywhere. For the first time in days, I felt something shift inside me, a tiny flicker of hope, or maybe just the comfort of being seen. After Luke left, Juliet hovered in the kitchen, her hands twisting nervously. I thought, maybe you'd like some company. I know I'm not enough right now. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the fear in her eyes. She was still my little girl, lost and trying to make things right. I reached out, pulling her into a hug. She stiffened at first, then melted against me, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I'm sorry, Auntie, she whispered. I just wanted to help. I thought if I could fix things, maybe you'd forgive me. I stroked her hair, my own tears falling. Oh, Juliet, I never stopped loving you. I needed time. I still do. We stood there for a long time, holding each other, the rain tapping out a gentle rhythm on the window. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. The days grew longer, the light returning slowly to the world outside. I started to unpack the boxes, one by one, letting the memories wash over me. Old photographs, letters, a chipped teapot from my mother's kitchen. Each object was a piece of the life I'd lost, but also a reminder of the love that had filled it. Luke visited often, always bringing something: a loaf of bread, a jar of honey, a story from the village. He never pushed, never asked for more than I could give. Sometimes we would walk together along the harbor, the sea air sharp and bracing, the gulls wheeling overhead. We talked about everything and nothing: our childhoods, the people we'd lost, the small joys that still made life worth living. One evening, as the sun set over the water, Luke took my hand in his. We stood in silence, watching the sky turn gold and pink. I missed you, Claire, he said quietly. All these years, I missed you. I felt my heart ache, not with pain, but with something softer, more hopeful. I missed you too, Luke. I just didn't know it. He smiled, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my hand. It's not too late, you know, for new beginnings. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to let go of the past, to open myself to the possibility of happiness, even after everything. Back at the apartment, Juliet was waiting for me, her face anxious. She'd made dinner simple, but made with care. We ate together, the three of us, and for the first time in a long while, I felt almost at peace. But the past was not finished with us yet. The days after Lutz's visit passed in a kind of gentle blur. I found myself moving more slowly, as if the world had shifted and I was still trying to find my footing. The apartment was small, but it was filled with light, and I began to notice the little things: the way the sun warmed the kitchen table in the morning, the sound of Juliet humming to herself as she made tea, the scent of rosemary from the bouquet Luke had brought. I started to unpack the boxes, one by one. At first it was just to keep busy, to give my hands something to do while my mind wandered. But as I unwrapped each object: a chipped teapot, a faded photograph, a stack of old letters, I felt the weight of memory settle around me. Each item was a piece of the life I'd lost, but also a reminder of the love that had filled it. One afternoon, as the rain tapped softly against the window, I opened a box labeled kitchen. Inside, tucked between a stack of cookbooks and a bundle of old recipes, I found the letter from my mother. I'd read it before, but now, in this new place, it felt different, heavier somehow, as if the words themselves had grown more urgent. For Claire, when she is ready. But my hands trembled. As I unfolded the paper, the handwriting was familiar, looping and elegant. The ink faded but still clear. My dearest Claire, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. And you are the keeper of our family's secrets. There are things you do not know, things I could never say aloud. I hope you will forgive me. Love is complicated, and sometimes we make choices we cannot undo. Take care of your sister, she will need you more than you know. I read the letter over and over, searching for meaning in the spaces between the words. What secrets, what choices? I thought of Isabel, of her wildness, her sadness, the way she always seemed to be running from something. I wondered if I would ever know the truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the rain on the roof, the distant sound of traffic in the square below. My mind wandered back to my childhood, to the arguments I'd overheard late at night, my mother's voice, sharp with anger, my father's low and pleading. I remembered the way my mother would sit by the window, staring out at the sea, her face shadowed with worry. The next morning, I decided to go through the last box, the one I'd been avoiding. It was filled with old papers, letters, and photographs. As I sorted through them, I found another envelope, yellowed with age, addressed to my mother in a handwriting I didn't recognize. To Marie, with love. I'm sorry for everything. Inside was a birth certificate, Isabel's, but the father's name was not my father's. My hands shook as I read the name, Jean-Luc Moreau. I sat down hard, the truth crashing over me. Isabel was not my father's child. My mother had had an affair, and Isabel was the result. That was the secret she'd carried, the pain that had haunted our family for generations. I thought of Isabel, her restlessness, her sadness, the way she never seemed to belong. I thought of myself, always the caretaker, always the outsider. And I thought of Juliet, caught in the web of secrets and lies, trying to do what she thought was right. That evening, I called Juliet into the living room. She came in, her face wary, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her sweater. I found something, I said, my voice trembling, about your mother, about our family. She sat down across from me, her eyes wide. I handed her the letter, the birth certificate, the truth laid bare. She read them in silence, her face pale. When she finished, she looked up at me, tears streaming down her cheeks. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know any of this. I nodded, my own tears falling. Neither did I, but it explains so much, doesn't it? Why Isabel was always running, why our family was always broken. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. I'm sorry, Auntie. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to help. I thought if I could fix things, maybe you'd love me again. I reached across the table and took her hand, holding it tightly. I never stopped loving you, I said. But love isn't about fixing things. It's about being there, even when it hurts. We sat together in the small apartment, the weight of generations pressing down on us. For the first time, I felt the pain begin to lift. The next day, Luke stopped by with a basket of apples from his garden. He found us sitting at the kitchen table, the letter and birth certificate between us. Our eyes red from crying, but our hands joined. He didn't ask questions. He just set the basket down, poured us each a cup of tea, and sat with us in the quiet. His presence was a comfort, a reminder that even in the midst of pain, there could be moments of peace. That evening, as the sun set over the rooftops, I walked with Luke along the harbor. The air was cool, the sky streaked with pink and gold. We didn't talk much, but his hand found mine, warm and steady. You're stronger than you think, Claire, he said softly. You always have been. I looked at him, at the kindness in his eyes, and felt something inside me begin to heal. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. I knew the road ahead would be long, that there would be days when the grief would return, sharp and sudden, but I also knew I wasn't alone. I had Juliet. I had Luke. I had the memories of the home I'd lost, and the promise of new beginnings. And for the first time, in a long time, I felt ready to live again. The days after the truth came out were quieter, but not in the way they had been before. There was a new kind of silence in the apartment, one that felt less like emptiness and more like space to breathe, to think, to let the pain settle and soften. Juliet and I moved around each other gently, as if we were both afraid of breaking something fragile between us. But there was relief too. The secrets that had weighed on our family for so long were finally out in the open. I could see it in Juliet's face, the way her shoulders relaxed, the way she started to smile again, even if only for a moment. We talked more, sometimes late into the night, sharing stories about Isabel, about my parents, about the things we'd never said before. One evening, as we sat together on the sofa, Juliet turned to me, her eyes shining with tears. Do you think she ever loved me? My mother, I mean. I took her hand, squeezing it gently. I know she did. She didn't know how to show it. She was lost, Juliet, lost in her own pain. Juliet nodded, wiping her eyes. I wish I could have known her. Really known her. I pulled her close, holding her the way I used to when she was small. You have me, and I have you. That's enough. We sat like that for a long time, the quiet between us filled with understanding. Luke became a regular presence in our lives. He would stop by after work, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with nothing but a smile and a story about the village. He had a way of making the apartment feel less like a place of exile and more like a home. He never pushed, never asked for more than I could give. Sometimes we would walk together along the harbor, the sea, air sharp and bracing, the sky wide and endless above us. One afternoon, Luke invited me to his house for dinner. It was a small, cozy place on the edge of town, with a garden full of wildflowers, and a kitchen that smelled of herbs and wood smoke. He cooked a simple meal, roast chicken, potatoes, a salad from his garden, and we ate by candlelight. The windows opened to the sound of the sea. After dinner, we sat in the garden, watching the stars come out. Luke poured us each a glass of wine and leaned back in his chair, looking at me with a softness I hadn't seen in years. "I'm glad you're here, Claire," he said quietly. "I know things have been hard, but I want you to know you're not alone, not anymore." I felt a warmth spread through me, a sense of safety I hadn't felt in a long time. I reached across the table, taking his hand in mine. "Thank you, Luke, for everything." He smiled, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my hand. "It's not too late, you know, for new beginnings." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to let go of the past, to open myself to the possibility of happiness, even after everything. Back at the apartment, Juliet was waiting for me, her face anxious. She'd made tea, and we sat together in the kitchen, talking about nothing and everything. She asked about Luke, about the dinner, about how I was feeling. "I'm happy for you, Auntie," she said, her voice soft. "You deserve to be happy." I smiled, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "So do you, Juliet. We both do." The days grew longer, the light returning slowly to the world outside. I started to find joy in small things again: the taste of fresh bread, the sound of birds in the morning, the way the sun warmed my face as I walked through the square. Juliet started working at a small bookshop around the corner, a place run by a kind woman named Myla, who wore bright scarves and always had a story to share. I think the routine helped her, gave her something to hold on to. She would come home in the evenings with new books, sometimes a pastry or a flower she'd picked on her walk. She was quieter than before, more careful with her words, but there was a softness returning to her, a gentleness I remembered from her childhood. One evening, as we walked along the harbor, Luke stopped and looked out at the water, his hands in his pockets. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and the boats bobbed gently in the harbor. "I used to come here with Marie," he said quietly, meaning his late wife. "She loved the sea. Said it made her feel small, but in a good way, like all her worries could just float away." I glanced at him, surprised by the openness in his voice. "I always felt that way too," I said, "like the sea could carry away anything I couldn't hold." He smiled, a little sadly. "I think that's why I stayed here. After she was gone, I couldn't leave the memories behind." We stood in silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. I felt a warmth in my chest, a sense of connection that was both comforting and terrifying. I hadn't let myself feel this way in years, not since before Isabel left, not since I'd taken on the weight of everyone else's happiness. Luke turned to me, his eyes gentle. "You don't have to carry it all alone, Claire. Not anymore." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to let myself lean on someone, to trust that I could be loved for who I was, not just for what I could give. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birds outside the window, the first real sign of spring. I made coffee, opened the window, and let the fresh air fill the room. Juliet joined me, her hair tousled, her eyes brighter than I'd seen in weeks. "Do you think we'll ever be okay again?" she asked, her voice small. I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I think we already are. Or at least, we're on our way." She smiled, and for the first time, I believed it. Luke arrived later, bringing fresh croissants and a shy bouquet of violets. We ate together, laughing at old stories, sharing new hopes. The pain was still there, but it was softer now, tempered by love and forgiveness. I knew the road ahead would be long, that there would be days when the grief would return, sharp and sudden, but I also knew I wasn't alone. I had Juliet. I had Luke. I had the memories of the home I'd lost, and the promise of new beginnings, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to live again. The days began to settle into a rhythm, gentle and unfamiliar. I would wake early, sometimes before the sun, and sit by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the town come to life. The bakery below would open, sending up the scent of fresh bread and warm sugar, and I'd hear the clatter of delivery vans in the square. It was not the life I'd known, but it was life. And I was still here. Juliet's job at the bookshop became a small anchor for both of us. She would come home in the evenings with stories about the customers: an old man who only read detective novels, a young woman who bought poetry and always left a flower on the counter. Sometimes she'd bring home a new book for me, or a pastry, or just a smile that made her look like the child I remembered. We talked more and more honestly. There were still moments of awkwardness, of pain, but the sharp edges had softened. One night, as we sat together on the sofa, Juliet asked, "Do you ever wish things had been different, that you'd had your own life, instead of raising me?" I looked at her, surprised by the question. "Of course I wonder, sometimes, but I don't regret it. Juliet, you gave my life meaning. You were never a burden. You were my joy." She nodded, her eyes shining. "I'm sorry for everything, Auntie, for the house, for the secrets, for not being the daughter you deserved." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You were exactly the daughter I needed, and I'm proud of you. I always have been." We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. Luke became a fixture in our lives. He would come by in the evenings, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with nothing but a story and a smile. He and Juliet got along. Well, she teased him about his old-fashioned ways, and he teased her about her city habits. Sometimes, after dinner, the three of us would walk along the harbor, the air cool and salty, the sky streaked with the last light of day. One evening, Luke invited me to a small concert at the church. The music was simple, just a piano and a violin, but it filled the old stone building with warmth. We sat together in the back pew, our hands touching lightly, and I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Afterward, we walked slowly through the quiet streets, the town bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. Luke stopped in front of the bakery, turning to face me. "I know things have been hard, Claire. I know you're still healing, but I want you to know I care for you. I always have. And I'd like to be part of your life, if you'll let me." I felt tears prick my eyes, but they were happy tears, the kind that come when you realize you're not alone after all. "I'd like that, Luke. I really would." He smiled, and for a moment, I felt young again, hopeful, open, ready for whatever might come next. Back at the apartment, Juliet was waiting for me, her face bright. She'd made tea, and we sat together, talking about the concert, about Luke, about the future. She told me she was thinking of taking a course in children's literature, maybe even going back to school. I encouraged her, proud of her courage, her willingness to start again. Spring came slowly, the days growing longer, the air warmer. I planted herbs in pots on the windowsill, filling the apartment with the scent of basil and thyme. Luke helped me hang pictures on the walls, making the space feel more like home. Sometimes, on weekends, we'd drive out to the countryside, walking through fields of wildflowers, talking about everything and nothing. One afternoon, as we sat by the river, Luke took my hand in his. "You know, Claire, I think we're both getting a second chance. Not everyone gets that." I smiled, leaning my head on his shoulder. "I know, and I'm grateful. For you, for Juliet, for all of it, even the hard parts." He kissed my forehead, gentle and sure. "You deserve happiness, Claire. Don't ever doubt that. If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about everything we'd been through, the loss, the betrayal, the secrets, the pain. But I also thought about the love that had carried us through, the forgiveness that had made healing possible, the hope that was slowly, quietly, returning. I knew there would still be hard days, moments when the past felt too heavy, when the ache of what we'd lost threatened to overwhelm me. But I also knew that I wasn't alone. I had Juliet, I had Luke, I had the promise of new beginnings, and for the first time in a long time, I looked forward to tomorrow. The summer that followed was the gentlest I could remember. The days stretched out, golden and slow, the air filled with the scent of cut grass and the distant sound of children playing in the square. I found myself smiling more, laughing at small things, feeling lighter than I had in years. The pain of losing the house, the betrayal, the secrets, they were still there, but they no longer defined me. They were part of my story, but not the whole of it. Juliet flourished in her new routine. She made friends at the bookshop, started taking evening classes, and even joined a small writing group. Sometimes, I would find her at the kitchen table, scribbling in a notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. She shared her stories with me, stories about mothers and daughters, about forgiveness and starting over. I saw so much of myself, in her, my stubbornness, my hope, my longing for connection, but I also saw her strength, her resilience, her willingness to face the truth, no matter how painful. Luke and I grew closer, our relationship deepening in ways that surprised me. We spent long afternoons walking by the sea, talking about everything and nothing. He taught me how to fish, how to let go of things I couldn't control, how to find joy in the present moment. Sometimes, we would sit in his garden, watching the sun set, our hands entwined. There was a comfort in his presence, a sense of safety I hadn't known in a long time. One evening, as we sat together on the old stone wall overlooking the harbor, Luke turned to me, his eyes soft. "You know, Claire, I think you're the bravest person I know." I laughed, shaking my head. "I don't feel brave, most days. I just feel tired, but grateful, so grateful." He squeezed my hand. "That's what bravery is, I think. Getting up every day, even when it hurts. Choosing to love, even when you're afraid." I leaned against him, watching the boats bob in the fading light. I used to think home was a place, 4 walls, a roof, a garden, but now I know it's the people you love, the ones who stay, even when things fall apart. He kissed my hair, and for a moment, I let myself believe in happy endings. Juliet joined us sometimes, her laughter ringing out across the water. She and Luke got along. Well, he teased her about her city ways, and she teased him about his old-fashioned habits. We became a family, not the one I'd imagined, but one we'd built together, piece by piece. There were still hard days. Sometimes, I would wake in the night, heart pounding, missing the old house, the life I'd lost, but those moments grew fewer, and when they came, I let myself feel the grief, then let it go. I learned that healing isn't about making peace with the past, about choosing to move forward, even when it's hard. One afternoon, as I was watering the herbs on the windowsill, Juliet came to stand beside me. She looked out at the square, her face thoughtful. "Do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" she asked. I thought for a moment, then shook my head. "No, not anymore. If things hadn't happened the way they did, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have found each other again." She smiled, her eyes shining. "I'm glad I have you, Auntie. I'm glad you never gave up on me." I hugged her, holding her close. "Never, not for a second." If you're still here, please don't forget to subscribe to Myla Stories. I share stories that come straight from the heart. That evening, as the sun set over the rooftops, I sat with Luke and Juliet, sharing a simple meal, laughing at old stories. I looked around the table and felt a deep, quiet, joyous sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. I realized then that life is never what we expect. It's messier, harder, more beautiful than we can imagine. We lose things we think we can't live without, and somehow, we go on. We find new ways to love, new reasons to hope. We build new homes, not from bricks and mortar, but from forgiveness, from kindness, from the courage to begin again. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: no matter how lost you feel, no matter how much you've lost, it's never too late to start over. It's never too late to forgive, to love, to find your way home. Thank you for listening to my story.